Welcome to episode 13 of The Tech Bubble, our first of season 3. As you can see, for those of you watching us on YouTube, rather than listening via our podcast, we're trying something a little different for our next 6 episodes. For those of you new to The Tech Bubble, I'm your host, Ian Williamson, and today, given that we've gone visual, what better way to celebrate the possibilities of audio-visual than to focus on film?
Quite frankly, Mr. Williamson, I'm surprised it took you a whole 12 episodes to finally bring your subject area front and center. On another note, big congratulations on getting SIS certified. We're all so proud of you.
Thank you very much.
This is Chloe Jazzy Lau, co-host of The Tech Bubble, and I have to say that I'm going out on a bit of a limb for this one, given that I dropped media back in year 9.
3 years later, and I've nearly forgiven you, Chloe. That's after your contribution to the DLC. And that reminds me, we are of course not just talking about film today, but rather the cross-section between technology and film. And what a great guest list we have.
First up, appearing on The Tech Bubble for the second time, it's Mrs. Curran, one of the school's most passionate advocates of technology. Mrs. Curran is a Google Level 1 and Level 2 certified educator and ISTE certified educator too. As her film, media, and TOK students will attest, she has introduced countless apps into her lessons and had an article published in the Times Educational Supplement during lockdown, which reminded all of us that EdTech helps support our teaching and learning objectives. She's also provided some great animation classes in school as part of our extracurricular program, and Mr. Williamson here reliably informs me that she is the best editor in the school. Not surprising, really, given her background in television. Mrs. Curran, welcome back to the show. We're so glad to have you back.
I'm very happy to be here. Looking forward to it. Thank you.
And Larissa, you're not the only Curran on the show today, because we have Mr. Curran, aka John. John is not a stranger to Southislandschool, having completed many Film Pro activities as part of Mad Week. John is a professional cinematographer with many years of experience working in film and TV, from BAFTA-winning interactive dramas to studio directing and examining lighting for stills and videos. John has just completed his doctorate in this area. Well done, John.
Thanks very much.
And I'd also like to say he is very much part of the film and media family here in our department, helping to advise us on the purchase of new equipment, whilst also having provided a lot of training to both the students and the staff alike. And that includes the entire ESF, by the way. John's appreciation of aesthetics extends way beyond the camera itself, as he also provides the colour grading each year for Film Pro, which has provided some memorable visual looks to the films produced. But ultimately, like me when I'm directing those very same films, we kind of just do what Mrs. Curran tells us to do in the end, really for fear of our lives. John, what do you think?
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Welcome to the show, John.
Thanks very much. I'm really looking forward to it.
Speaking of a sensational visual look, our next guest has produced some of the most popular films in Hong Kong, especially for SIS students. In recent years, she has worked with her partner, James Ha, another member of our SIS alumni community. Alison Thomas set up Scene 852, which has become something of a production house for SIS film and media graduates. This was after Alison graduated as an IB student from our school back in the class of 2011 and went on to study film at Bournemouth University in the UK. So some of the major clients that Scene 852 has worked with include the Hong Kong Jockey Club, Adidas, AIA, HKU, and a lot more that I'm sure Alison could or may not get into. Welcome to the Tech Bubble, Alison. We're so glad to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
And our final guest today is one of our current IB film students and is about to start year 13. Nicholas Tam from 13C2 is one of our most prolific young filmmakers, having no less than 3 of the 4 Making a Difference nominations in the recent SIS Film Awards for 2021. Given the preponderance of cinematographers in the room, Nicholas will feel he is in good company, given that he also scooped the Best Cinematographer Award, which coincidentally, Alison also won back in 2010. Nicholas, great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me here today. It's like amazing to be sitting here with everybody here, but I do feel a little underqualified.
Well, wow, what a great guest list. There are so many potential places to begin and talk about film as a medium just because it's such a broad field, but perhaps a good starting point is to consider the filmmaking culture here in Hong Kong. For young budding filmmakers at school, how feasible is it to make a career in the industry itself? I'd love to hear from you, John, and then Allison. What have been your experiences and most memorable tidbits from working in the city?
I think, before we started interviewing, we were talking about this, and I think that what for me was interesting when I first came to Hong Kong was I was expecting Hong Kong to be really massively technically advanced, and when I first turned up at CNN to do some work with them, they handed me a camera that still had videotape in, and I was really quite surprised. I was kind of like, oh, okay, I haven't used tape for a couple of years now in the UK. This is kind of a bit weird. And then there was a shift in the crews were generally a little bit smaller. So there was almost like a little bit of a downsizing. But I think that very much depends on what you're doing in Hong Kong. So you've got different areas of the Hong Kong industry. So there are larger, obviously there's feature production still, and on those you do have larger crews. But on a lot of the production in Hong Kong, the crew size is actually quite small, and the turnaround time is very quick as well. So you tend to go from initial contact to completion very quickly, which is whereas in the UK you generally have a bit more time, especially on the post end. So you'd have more time to actually edit and grade potentially. So that was interesting. I mean, we were talking,
Because I have the same experience as well. As soon as I came to Hong Kong, everything is faster. So the expectation to finish a project is faster. And I don't know if it's because Hong Kong's such a trendy place where, there's a new trend, so we have to have the video out on time. And like John said, everything, the crews are smaller, but I don't know if it's got something to do with the space in Hong Kong, because you can't really fit a 20-people crew in a small space, and all the sort of lighting equipments, you have to go a bit smaller, or else the whole room would be overexposed. But in terms of working in Hong Kong, I do think that you need to put on a lot of different hats on. So even though mainly I'm a director, but I do need to switch roles quite often due to smaller production sizes. So it's good that you get the whole spectrum of the, different roles like editing, cinematography, producer, director. You kind of switch roles more often in Hong Kong.
Yeah, I mean, I'm finding that. So it's for me, it's quite interesting because when in the UK, I was working initially with what were considered to be small teams in the UK, and but I'd still have, every time I went out, that I would be doing camera and lighting, but I would always have a sound engineer.
Yeah, exactly.
And the number of times I've had a sound engineer on Hong Kong projects, I think I can probably count on one hand, maybe. It's because it's really the expectation for the camera to do sound on so many projects is just part of the role now. Definitely. It's you just kind of, okay, you're going to turn up, and if you say, can I have a sound engineer? I mean,
it's also the same person.
What? Yeah, what's a sound engineer? Because
I have realized that a lot of camera trainees that have what they call a sifu or a master they follow, they're also learning about, they take out the sound equipment as well. And I think in the UK you wouldn't see the cameraman ever touching the sound equipment. So it's more, the roles are more focused. But I guess it's in a way a good thing in Hong Kong because everyone just knows a bit of everything. Yeah. So maybe in terms of someone like me who like to direct, it's quite good to know the whole spectrum of filmmaking. And I do think, the film course that I've been to on SIS have also taught you to go try everything. And so did my university course. So quite lucky with that.
It's quite interesting you say that. I mean, I'm sure Nicholas can talk more about this, but the new course, since the specification changed, one of the tasks is a portfolio-based one, which means that the students now have to be assessed in 3 different roles across, the duration of the course. Yeah. So the days of being able to specialise as a cinematographer only or an editor only, which sometimes students are able to do, they're well since gone. How have you found that, Nicholas, being able to work across 2 or 3 different roles? Has that been beneficial for you?
I really feel like it was beneficial for me because usually in back in year 9 or year 10 or during GCSEs even, I would be mostly focused on only one like role in film productions. So I really didn't actually explore the aspects of kind of filmmaking even in school, because I was just chose what was comfortable for me. And with IB, with this with the film portfolio, I really did get to kind of develop my kind of character as a filmmaker in a more holistic way, because I was kind of forced to be a scriptwriter or a director, and I had to experiment with it and do some research on the role before. So I feel like it was beneficial in a way, and for me to develop as a filmmaker. And especially now, I feel like filmmaking seems to be it's a lot more accessible to everybody now. So I feel like it's good to have like a wide skill set, so then you can kind of make your own films even with kind of the technology that's available to you now.
It's so much cheaper as well. When I first arrived here in 2004, I mean, the film studies department was based in C11, and we had absolutely no editing equipment at all. There wasn't even a computer in the room at that point. So what you were talking about, John, in terms of editing via tape, essentially.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there were maybe 2 old, video recorders stuck on top of each other with the old wheel, with the linear editing process. And that's changed so dramatically and so quickly. I just wanted to ask, I mean, any of you can jump in on this one, but the locations in Hong Kong are just fantastic, aren't they? I mean, I think it's one of the things that I've loved the most about living here. Being out on set. I mean, you made a film recently, Alison, with Scene 852, where you were jumping into it was futuristic, and we actually played it, the film, with Nicholas's film class. Yeah, I mean, you use so many different locations there.
Yeah, I mean, like that film, we kind of planned it around 5 years ago, or 6, 7 years ago, when I first came back to Hong Kong. I'm like, there's so many locations, there's so many possibilities, and that's how that film started. And it does give you the benefit of like creating crazy sort of story worlds, because you look around the corner, it's like high-tech looking, and then just around the corner there's a really old street that could be the 80s, maybe. So it does give you a lot more story possibilities and settings, and you could cheaply film it, basically.
How have you found those location changes, John, from the UK?
Being able to, that richness that you get in a tiny space is one of the most amazing things about producing in Hong Kong. It's the ability to, visually change what it is you're doing by turning around, as you say, looking down the next street, and you're suddenly looking at a completely different space. That's definitely one of the best things about it. And also being able to do that, being able to go city, new city, old city, beach, mountain, in the same day. It's an amazing, and I think it's one of the few places that you can really do that. It's kind of, again, in the UK, I was based in London, mountains, mountains, no, city, yes. Beaches, no. Mountains, no. It's got, you couldn't do. Actually having that wealth of possibilities is one of the most amazing things about shooting in Hong Kong, and it lets you bring different things to projects that you wouldn't be able to do in other places, I think, which is
a creative catalyst, isn't it? Let's be honest.
Yeah. Oh my God, absolutely. Yeah. You and you're always seeing things. It's kind of I suppose that's as a cameraman, I always have a camera with me. I mean, everyone has a camera with them because everyone's got their phone with them all the time. But I always have a camera with me, and I'm always looking around and seeing different shapes and different images and light falling in different ways in old buildings and new buildings, or old buildings and new buildings right next to each other, which is one of the things I love. Actually,
It's like on a filming day, you could really just fit in like 4 settings if you're crazy enough to.
Absolutely.
From location to location.
Yeah.
What's the most settings you've had in one shooting day in Hong Kong? Just quite curious.
Now that's probably a ridiculous number actually.
Film Pro, John. We must have had sometimes with so many different
in
classrooms.
Film Pro
we did 10 in one day.
In Film Pro we did. We've done a crazy number because we did. Obviously, we've done classrooms, corridors, so internals. We did outside on the.
We did on the hillside.
On the hillside, and on commercial projects, I've done airport.
Oh, yeah.
And then back into the city, container. So I did, I did airport, container port, back in the city, for some evening shots as well. So you kind of get this. So obviously then you're spending a lot of time driving.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
So that kind of is the thing. It means that you arrive somewhere, you set up. You're quick, grab some shots of the container port,
and
then kind of back in the van, drive to the.
And then your equipment starts becoming like, they stop going back into the tripod bags. It's like you're just holding it on the car.
Yeah. No, especially when you're doing news, it doesn't. You just basically have the camera and the tripod out all the time. So you're just it's kind of.
Nicholas, I mean, for you listening to all of this, I'm kind of curious to know, what is the sort of perception amongst the young filmmakers at a school level, so the students who are coming up, years 10, 11, I mean, you've been with us now for the last 4 years doing film in one form or another. So, what do you think are going to be like the kind of the pathways that are available to you going forward? How do you see your future panning out? I'm not just talking about, I'm not saying that's a pressure, by the way, to go to the film industry, but I'm asking more generally in terms of what the kind of discussions go on with regards to students in school as to making this feasible and having the kind of career that John and Alison are talking about?
Well, I feel like one of the most talked about options, of course, is university, right? You go abroad and study film and media in university. But I feel like that sometimes isn't as feasible for some people, because I feel like studying abroad is already a kind of high risk and high gain option for or path for a lot of people. And I feel like a lot of people that I talk to feel like film media or like if you study it, you're kind of entering an ultra competitive industry, and a lot of people feel like that financially it might not be worth it for them. So apart from university, I feel like just getting that work experience in Hong Kong or making kind of experiments and side projects on your own might be a better way to enter the film industry than university for a lot of people.
So get your name.
Yeah. Can I add on to that? Getting experience is absolutely invaluable. But the other thing, actually doing media at school and having that idea of media, whether you then go to university or whether you go and then get some experience, what I would say now is that they're not thinking of film as just film and television, but thinking of film as just part of almost every industry now, because that's the thing, is they're actually taking those filmmaking skills into business environments where you've got corporate companies who have internal video production teams, and you've got, so the scope for actually producing videos is much, much bigger now, because that's the way we communicate, and if anything, the pandemic has done, it's increased the way that visually and by using motion images is how we communicate. So having those skills is kind of going to be more sought after as just an integrated part of, I think, almost any role. So and so again, if you go to university and you get better at those skills, then you're potentially more saleable going into a range of industries, not just film and television, which I think is something that sometimes people forget, that actually it's a base set of skills that you can use, and it teaches things like obviously teamwork, which you must have found when you were doing your courses.
I also found that when I went to university, we had the access to all the equipment and all the crews for free, right? Like not for free, but like when you're doing projects, you could whenever you have a project, you could just go to the studio and rent it, like without the money you'd have to spend when you're out working. Because one of the biggest difference between being a student and when you're actually working is you need to start paying people, and you got to start paying for crew. So university was a good way to have like your crew available whenever you want. As long as you speak to them. If they're free, they'll do it for free, and everyone's learning, and it's a place where you can make mistakes and make some really bad films and be okay with it, But then obviously I don't think university has to be the path, because I do know people who didn't study film who ended up doing film. So my partner James didn't study film, but he went straight into the field, learned it very quickly. I think as long as you have a reliable team that would let you come in, make a few mistakes, as long as you're willing to go for it, then it's more about the attitude on set.
Right.
Yeah. So
I think increasingly we're seeing university courses become more interdisciplinary. So as John mentioned, having film integrated across the board. There are courses like modern culture and media, which is pretty big in US universities, which are naturally already more integrated across discipline. And I think this just helps people that don't even set out to become filmmakers see these fields and see these see history, sociology through the lens of film, and I think that brings a lot of new perspectives and cross-cultural collaboration and cross-disciplinary collaboration across this film space. So have you guys had experience with kind of looking at other disciplines at university? And of course, Nicholas, I know you're also considering geography and urban planning. So how do you guys look at that kind of integration across disciplines with film? Nicholas, do you want to go ahead?
Well, I feel like, especially now, that the information is now kind of moving away from text, and now it's moving to more kind of visual or audio-based mediums. I think generally it's just a faster way to communicate between people, and it's more interesting than just reading. So I feel like in almost any kind of industry or subject, or kind of whether it's academics or a business, information is kind of being spread through film or media in general in a more kind of visual and audio-based way. So yeah, I feel like film is it's just becoming more of an essential kind of skill in almost anything you do now.
Yeah, very much so. It is just part of. It's part of every aspect of life, really. It's everything from talking to your family, wherever they are, and obviously, and again, the pandemic has accelerated that by a massive degree, because everybody has been stuck in their own locations, and the travel has stopped. So you've got this massive increase in being able to talk to people. So that's changed the way that we work, and also working from home, obviously. So for lots of businesses, lots of people had to suddenly transition to communicating using video, and it's not going out and hiring a film crew to make something, but it's everybody has suddenly realised that actually, if you have your laptop on the desk under your nose, it doesn't look great. And so the number of people who have laptops on piles of books, so that the camera is actually at a good angle, and these kind of basic things. But they're the things that you learn about visual communication, about filmic presentation on courses, and then you learn, whether the course is at school or whether the course is at university. And again, as whether it's part of, or whether it's a filmic component in another program, which is something that's important. I mean, when we were developing the television production degrees in the UK, it was at a time when the industry in the UK was moving to smaller production teams. So we were narrowing production teams, and people were beginning to multitask at that point, but it was still very much a separate industry. And but then as we went along, we had more communication with other programs, and so by the time I'd left the UK, which was over a decade now ago, we were even at that point we were having communication with other programs who wanted to integrate some of the things that we were doing in their programs. So, you know, I mean, that's just accelerated.
Yeah, for sure.
So.
Yeah, Ms. Curran, I'm interested to hear your perspective. I'm sure you've advised a lot of students coming out of your film classes and going into film courses or interdisciplinary courses, whatever they choose to go into. Do you feel like film courses now are sort of shifting away from the technical aspect and going into the more cultural and social aspect? And essentially what I'm interested in is, how do you feel like film courses have shifted with the advent of technology? Do you feel like the teaching mediums and the type of kind of instructions and the way they teach film and think about film has fundamentally changed as a result of technology at university?
I think most universities have been pretty good at keeping up with technology because that's how they attract students, actually. I mean, you know, if you go around to universities to visit them, they, you know, part of their selling point is the facilities that they can offer. There's always been theoretical courses, you know, and actually that's where, you know, film studies started. And so the practical courses, the courses more designed to, you know, sort of train students or help students develop the skills needed to perhaps build a career in film, media or television, actually started in the old polytechnics in the UK. I think it's a bit different in America because in certain parts of America, so Los Angeles and New York in particular, where there's always been a demand for people with those skills. And I think, again, you know, it's different here in Hong Kong. I think that one of the most important things I say to my students, though, is you're not looking at a university with a big name. If you want to go to a university that is actually going to help you build a career, you need to be looking at what are their alumni doing? What connections with industry do they have? Because there's a lot of factors, you know, obviously if you're going to create your own company, that's something different. But if you know, if you're going to go in, you know, working for other people as a freelancer or whatever, yeah, you've got to be good at what you do and you've got to be, you know, fun to work with and all of this kind of stuff. But if you don't know the right people, you're never going to hear about the jobs. And then I think, as has been said by a couple of people, is that, you know, communicating through a visual medium is not about knowing how to use a camera. It's about knowing how to tell a story. And so it's good to, you know, yes, you can make your mistakes. You can work out, you know, what works, what doesn't work, where can I push the boundaries, where, you know, what is sacred kind of thing. And also just meeting like-minded people, you know, which is inspiring, you know, and that gives you the motivation. And I think a lot of people also find out that they don't want to do it. You know, but
and that's perfectly valid.
Because of those soft skills, you know, problem solving, teamwork, communication, they are so valuable, and that's what everyone, creativity, you know, that's what people are lacking and everybody's looking for. So so I still think university is the most viable option, actually, not because you're going to have a degree at the end of it, but you're going to have connections that you didn't have before. And you're going to have had the space to grow and to develop in a way that you wouldn't. I think I said earlier, I said one of the things that's a bit different in different parts of the world. In the UK, there's a very strong apprenticeship system. So, you know, people want to go into film particularly, you know, can get onto apprenticeships and you know, you pretty much know you've got a job for life. You can go work for the BBC, you know, you're going to have a job for life, this kind of stuff. And I think here, if students that want to stay in Hong Kong, it depends quite a bit on your language skills. You know, if you don't speak Cantonese, you're not going to get any kind of trainee position at all. So, you know, I think that's viable if, you know, if you've got that, or if you've already got contacts, you know, if you already know someone who, you know, has a company, and you can go work for them or do work experience for them, that kind of thing.
You were talking about that even before we started this morning.
So one of the biggest challenges I have, I think, working in Hong Kong is I can speak Cantonese, but with less confidence, because there are certain vocabularies where I'm like, oh, I forgot what that is. But so that's one thing you really do need to consider is the language barrier. But if you don't speak Cantonese, it's still possible, but you really do need a support system of people who can immediately translate things for you, or can speak confidently in Cantonese. So, for example, my partner James, he could read, write, and speak Cantonese very fluently. So a lot of the presentation things, he kind of overtakes it, and I sort of brief, what kind of things to talk about, and he just gets straight on it and charms people straight away. So, if you still want to work in Hong Kong, make sure you do have the support system for speaking Cantonese, because I have noticed that throughout the few years I've worked here, there has been more and more requirement for Cantonese. And also, if you look at the MTR advertisements now, when I was younger, there's always English and Chinese, right? But now I've seen ads where it's just pure Chinese everywhere. So that's definitely one of the things to consider.
John, I'm curious to know, how has your experience been with communicating with Chinese-speaking clients on commercial projects?
It's the same, actually. Obviously, I speak no Cantonese at all. So when I first got here, my initial contacts were through news agencies, because I had contacts with Reuters. And so I was doing some work with Reuters and then CNN and BBC. So I was doing mainly news. And then I built up some corporate contacts as well. And what you tend to find is that when you're working with international news agencies, you're then talking with English-speaking producers and directors. So the language is not an issue then. But when you go to locations, you need people in the team who can then speak Cantonese. Because of that, you need that communication to be able to. And then again with corporate, we quite often find that even if the director I wasn't working with, maybe the gaffer I was working with was actually local, and so they would actually do all of the local communication when we went to a site. And that was a godsend, because it meant that you would turn up and you would, rather than having these stuttered conversations trying to figure out where you were going and what you were supposed to be doing, I'd turn up and my gaffer would just go and have a quick conversation with whoever was nearby, and we'd know exactly where we were going, and we'd be in. So it was, having that communication support system in place, massively important. But it does depend on, again, there's a very, very small niche area where you don't need it, and that is the international, mainly the international news agencies. But again, even with the international news agencies, once you're actually on site, you need somebody who can speak Cantonese. So,
John, just for some of the younger listeners or who listen to the podcast, or those who are viewing this on YouTube, if they've never heard the word gaffer before, can you just give us a very brief explanation of what it means?
Yeah, people like me as well.
We always have an imaginary Year 7 student. He's going to be in my tutor group this year. They're not going to be imaginary any longer. So I'd like them to know what these things are.
So gaffer's basically really important person in charge of lighting and electricity. So they are the person totally in charge of putting all your lights up, organising all of your lights, making sure that you're not drawing too much power and blowing all the fuses in a building, which I have known people to do. So luckily I haven't done that. So,
I think we've got our next episode sorted out, by the way.
Fingers crossed there. So the gaffer is the person who is in charge of all of that. So if you're on set and somebody is going around and they're adjusting all the lights and they're setting the lights up, that will be, if you're just working with a gaffer, which in Hong Kong on a lot of sets you're only working with a gaffer, unless you're working on a really big production, and then you might be working with a best boy and all the gaffers' assistants. So that's who a gaffer is. It's the person in charge of lights and electricity.
Great.
And they are massively, massively important. And it also means that in terms of, as a director of photography, which is the UK TV term for basically the cinematography and television. As a director of photography, it means that having a gaffer with you means that you can say, okay, this is what we need the lighting to do, and then physically I'm worried then about the camera, so I can get my assistant So I can talk to my camera assistant and get them to set the camera the way I want it to look, and I can get my gaffer to be putting the lights where they need to be to achieve the look on the people that are there. So that, and having that communication system and that team separation means that you can get things done effectively, and you can achieve looks and that you wouldn't be able to if you were just running around on your own. Although having said that, there's lots of interesting changes in technology that have changed things that you can and can't do with lighting now, which is a godsend.
Yeah.
But anyway, sorry, yeah.
No, absolutely.
I'll keep waffling. So.
That was very helpful. Thank you.
That was a good segue, actually,
For
wasn't it,
leaving
Chloe?
with me. Yeah. So anyway, I'm guessing that given our technical focus on the tech bubble, a lot of our listeners will expect us to talk about, the hardware, software. Don't worry, listeners, we'll get into that. We're not depriving you of that, but right now, as Ms. Curran mentioned, and a lot of our other guests did, technology is really not a means to really not an end in itself, but rather a means to an end. And that is to say, it's used to aid good storytelling. And so, John or Mrs. Curran, given your years of experience in filmmaking, I'm curious to know what were the biggest shifts and adjustments you had to make in your production processes when transitioning from the kind of pre-digital era to the post-digital filmmaking era. Whether that's technology, working with crews, and how do you think that's influenced the way you storytell through films?
For me as an editor, I started on those 2-3 machines that you had with videotape in editing in a linear way. And so I actually think that was great for my development because it forces you to think about what you're trying to say and to plan how you're going to use the material you have to convey that. You haven't got the luxury of being able to constantly go back and change things and tweak things and all of this kind of thing. And I think it also gave me a sort of rigor in my editing in that, I don't waste time. I know what's not going to work. I know how accurate things need to be. On those 2 and 3 machine editing suites, trying to get frame accuracy was just so annoying. And, when you've been editing for a while, you see every frame. So, it's kind of like, and then you do it again, and then it slips the other way, or it goes. So when I'm not that old, so, I did fairly quickly move to, digital editing, non-linear editing. And of course, the beauty of that is just, I often think that editing's a bit like, I don't know, maybe driving a car or something like that, a Formula One sports car or something like that. Because, when you're working with that machine, you're crafting something and you're shaping it. And so to have something that's responsive in a way that a Formula One car would be responsive, right? And I think that's what the software that we have gives us. You have to know how to use it, of course. If you don't know how to use it, then it's just, yes, you're going to, be... I don't know if people drive with stick shift cars these days, but, you're going to be going, with your car and that kind of thing. But, I think that's the biggest thing. I do think, though, that the shifts in technology have also meant that people often think that editing is about changing how the image looks or doing something that looks fancy, something that draws attention to the editing. And I find that quite frustrating, actually, because that's not what editing is about. Really, if you can see the editing, there's times where you want people to see it, but, if you can't do the basics where, you're actually using the editing to tell a story and people are focusing on the story, not your editing, then you're not really an editor. You should go into visual effects or something like that instead. So I think it's a kind of a double-edged sword. I think, you've got that enormous control that you just, didn't have with the 2 and 3 machine. But at the same time, I think sometimes, I think maybe, good editors are perhaps becoming rarer, perhaps.
Like invisible editing, like when you don't notice the edit is the best editing. When you just completely forget.
You're immersed, aren't you, in the storytelling. And it's interesting that sometimes I'm asked about how we do the judging for the film awards from one year to the next, and obviously, Mrs. Curran's expertise in editing is always central to the decision on best editor, which is one of those blue ribbon awards from one year to the next. And I would reinforce that point that quite often we have to force ourselves not to be wowed by just a really dramatic or very impressive moment in a film, but to look at the immersive storytelling that's going on. And it's an invisible practice often, if it's being done well. So yeah, I would completely reinforce everything that you've just said there.
Yeah.
So what about camera technology?
Well, as I said earlier, camera technology is changing. Daily almost. It's a great thing in terms of we're at the point now where we've got cameras with 16 stops of dynamic range. You've got massive dynamic range. You're able to go in and then you can, and you get 10-bit plus color information. So you're then able to go in and actually, in grade, create any look you want. And it's lovely to be able to do that. I think similarly to editing, in a way it's beneficial, in a way it's actually harmful to your progression as a camera person, because because when I first started, we were using video cameras that had a very, very small dynamic range, and so that it meant that when you were looking at an image, to get the image to look the way you wanted it to, you had to be very careful about how you lit the image, how you controlled lighting in the image, where you positioned things in the image, and the colours that you had in the images, and so you were forced to really think carefully about. You were forced to think about every single aspect, whereas now you can point a camera and literally go, "Yeah, it's going to be okay." Which is absolutely phenomenal, and I love the beautiful images that you can get with 16 stops of dynamic range. It's absolutely incredible. But it does mean that there is this tendency to not think about things, to not think about, okay, how do I, what is it I'm trying to achieve before I record? There's a danger to shooting with big dynamic range cameras that you take a documentary approach when you're not shooting a documentary, and the idea that you can get any look you can after. But the issue is that to actually get any look after is a lot of work. Whereas if you're actually going in and going, okay, I want it to look like this, and you have a picture of it in your head, and then you get it to look as close to your picture in your head when you're recording, means that when you then do get to editing and when you get to grading, you're doing a lot less, and it's also already pointed in the direction that you want it to go in. Even whether you're shooting with a camera with terrible dynamic range or massive dynamic range, and it's absolutely, and that's an interesting expansion of the way camera technology has developed. I think it's really interesting the way that AI is being used in image processing, and the way that you've got CNN's convolutional neural networks in AI assessing elements of picture to be able to recognize scenes and then expose pixel by pixel to a degree. So you're not now setting a base ISO so you're not setting a linear response curve across the entire image. AI is actually able to look at the sensor and go, well, that's a sun, and even though I want it to be really bright, I don't want it to be as bright so that it's just completely burnt out. So I'm going to pull that section down, and being able to do things. And that area of technology is absolutely incredible. It allows you to start with a good image. From a camera point of view, I love it. I love the fact that I can take out a phone and that the phone is capable with that AI processing of actually assessing an image, going, okay, I need to take 4 exposures, I need to then combine different aspects of those exposures to give me a really good image. That is incredible. At the other side of that is that, and talking to different people recently, over the last 4 years really, is that there feels like there's a loss in lighting more than anything. The ability to light. Because the cameras are so good at capturing, whether it's a camera on a phone or whether it's a camera with a big dynamic range, you can just point the camera and know you're going to get a usable image that you can do interesting things with in post. And so because of that, people don't light, and so you just turn up to a scene and you record the scene. And I used to always say when I was teaching people that if you're not lighting, you're recording. You're not creating anymore. And I never meant that you had to use artificial lights, but it's if you're not controlling the light in a scene, you're stuck with whatever it's doing. And I think that skill set of actually lighting is something that we're potentially in danger of losing to a degree. And that's a real pity, because actually controlling the light is something, and especially with lighting technology has changed so much, especially with the advent of LEDs, which are massive in terms of their capabilities. And I go out, and often I'm shooting on my own, and now I can go out with one little case with my camera and all of my lights in. And I've got a lot of these little LEDs, and I've got a couple of slightly bigger ones, and I can shape the image the way I want it to be. When I started, the smallest thing you went out with was an estate car, and the entire rear of the estate car would be full of lighting equipment, because that's how big lighting equipment was, and you had to have it. Whereas now you can take out small LEDs, and you can dial in any colour that you want, at any brightness that you want, and you can position one. So you have this incredible creative toolkit now, in terms of the way that camera technology is developed, in terms of the way that AI is being used, in terms of image processing, and then also in terms of actually the way that lighting technology has enabled your creativity and your color and lighting intensity toolkit. So
we've seen that even on Film Pro, haven't we?
Yeah.
I mean, I think when I think back to the original lighting that you needed in particular productions, we were finishing films often on the Friday. We were shooting films over a week's period. So I think it's interesting that the current films that we've done over the last 2 or 3 years have been done so much more quickly, and we've been finishing them on the Thursday. And I think that's partly because it's not taking quite as long to get all of that lighting set up, probably because of the sensitivity of the cameras, etc. It's really interesting hearing the thoughts of both John and Larissa with regards to the sort of pre-era, before digital technology, and then their current work. For the two of you, I suppose, as growing up in this digital generation of filmmakers, what are the things that you're most excited about in terms of your own work?
Well, I feel like Mr. Curran touched a lot about using AI to edit and use it to kind of help you with cinematography. I feel like another really kind of exciting part is using is like VR technology as a filmmaking tool. I think Alison mentioned earlier about The Mandalorian, where they used a kind of virtual set. They used an LED set to kind of create their background and their setting, and using an engine where you can kind of just put down any assets and kind of modify your environment to fit your and kind of like just adapt to your scene is really exciting, and I'm really kind of looking forward to seeing how that would change as, you know, potentially I could be kind of in that field when everything kind of evolves and becomes more accessible to, you know, kind of everyone in the filmmaking industry.
Is that your way of saying you want that in the budget for this year? just say it if you want to.
That'd be perfect.
Yeah, I mean, like John's mentioned earlier, that camera technology just changes every single year, and in a way it's quite hard to keep up. So even if you look at the Academy Awards, there's like a section just for the science development in technology in camera and lighting and all that. So in a way, I sometimes do find it hard to catch up. But then I think as long as you know the basics of, the basics of, color balance, or, I mean, white balance and like, shutter speed, all that, you can always, go on to the next stage, or like, so yeah, I do get excited when there's like a new camera out or anything like that, but I usually find out on set from the camera people. They're like, oh, have you checked out this new light? And I'd be like, what's this new light? And then they'll talk about it. But because you know the basic film terms and all the technical aspects, that's when you understand, oh wow, this is a very powerful piece of equipment. So yeah, it is quite exciting how every week there's something new.
Keeps you on your toes, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Well, speaking of the influence of new technology, obviously you guys are filmmakers. Nicholas, you're starting to get into making your own films and actually publishing a lot of those. So I was wondering actually, what do you think is the influence of social media in being able to promote your work? So in season 1 and 2 of The Tech Bubble, we spoke a lot about the influence of social media. Obviously, as with all things, it has its qualms and its bads, but it's also a great platform for storytellers and filmmakers like yourself to use it to advocate for their work, to spread messages, but also just to connect with your audience on a more intimate level. So I was wondering, Allison, especially in your work through Scene 852, how has social media influenced the way you share your work and how you communicate that?
I do think social media is a great platform for younger people in general, because it gives us an opportunity to put our work out there, where I think if 20 years ago, it'd be a lot harder for the younger generation to make a film and be like, hey, look at my work. So it gives young people an opportunity to show their skill set and how well they could, make something. And it also allows us to see so much and get influences about, different types of films or technology. But yeah, I do think it's a great platform for young people.
For sure. And Nicholas, you have your own digital portfolio and Instagram account, so what has been your experience with that?
Well, I mainly set those up to kind of promote my content and just share it, but I found that it's more of a tool for me to kind of network and find like opportunities to use film or like take photographs, right? I would never worked with like the Azaleas, which was a fashion show that premiered recently. I would never gotten in contact with them without having social media, without having friends that saw my content. And I also found that having social media was just with it being so accessible, it was always like a good way for me to kind of catalog my own experiences as well, and kind of like help share my own visual journey in a very, very accessible and convenient way to like a wider audience. And in general, I feel like social media and filmmaking is going to be very intertwined in general, because with film, you're always going to have an audience, and social media is just such a good way to share that with people, and you can get down to even like very like kind of personal and in-depth levels with sharing on social media.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, Nicholas, you mentioned the catalog, that you can kind of look back and see the progression of your work. Yeah. So you can have documentation from, 5 years ago, from when you first started off as a filmmaker, and then you have all that for the public eye to see, but you can also see, okay, this is how I've improved in these aspects. And then just, platform your growth and be able to see that progression. So I think that must be interesting, especially with this new technology coming in and seeing how your films have improved over time and your technique as well.
I mean, like another point I'd like to add about social media is, I don't know if anyone realizes, but in Hong Kong there's all these channels where it's actually a group of people who works very similarly to a TV kind of way, but except they upload everything onto their YouTube channel, and then they gain all their followers. They've got like 500,000 followers. But in Hong Kong, there's this culture of these channels where, you know, they sometimes create game shows, they sometimes create short films, but they get content out every day, and it's just crazy. But so essentially I feel like they're working like a TV network, except they're a group of young people who's just like very hardworking. They work from day to night, and they even have like talents that are there available all day. And it's quite interesting to see how there's this, you know, all these web series that come out and work like a TV network.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we talk a lot about you know, gatekeepers in the arts, and seeing the type of barriers that are pretty much have been taken away by social media and technology and the accessibility of these platforms. You know, if you wanted to make a TV docuseries, you would have had to book out a production studio, hire a crew, but now you can come together with a group of friends and have a platform like YouTube. And so definitely,
yeah, so like I think in like previously, if you want to do a series of something, you have to pitch it to, you know, a network or somebody. But now I think the pitching happens more for gaining finance for it, but you already have your platform to showcase whatever series you're trying to do.
With Scene 852, how much of the work that you are generating, how much is that coming through your social media content? I mean, are you getting, you know, feedback? Oh, I saw your stuff that you did with the Spartan race, so I did, so you know, how important is that in terms of getting you?
What's interesting is Scene 852 didn't have a social media platform for the first 5 years, because I felt like we needed a complete branding, you know, for it to all look like, oh, this is from Scene 852. So it took around 5 years to finalize our brand. But before that, it was a lot of word of mouth. So we started off with a lot of event capture. And the good thing about event captures is there's so many people watching the after movie because they're trying to like see where they are in the event. And so people see that through Facebook, and then they might contact that client and be like, oh, who made the video? And then we get that contact. And I guess it does help because it does spread and people realize, oh, it says it's by Scene 852, and then they go on the internet and they find out.
I think that's good advice actually for young filmmakers. Maybe don't rush into it. You know, take your time to develop your brand identity first.
Definitely.
And of course, social media is also being used. I mean, for some of the other guests that we've got in here, I mean, you know, I follow both John and Larissa on Twitter. So there's also the kind of analysis stuff that goes on and reposting of important, you know, I suppose messages and advocacy associated with the film industry and lots of other issues too. I guess there is a downside to all of this as well, though, isn't there? And I think maybe we'd need another entire episode to go into that, which might be Kate's coming forward. For regular listeners to the show, they'll know that we finish with a segment where I ask every guest to say something very briefly in a minute or so. So I'm going to go back to the imaginary Year 7 student again, as I always do. I'm in Year 7, and I'm a fairly talented young filmmaker, and I would like some advice in terms of how I take my skills forward. So what would be the advice that you would give them? 1 minute for each of you. Alison, can we start with you?
Yeah, I would say keep making films, keep making mistakes. When you find a crew of people, be respectful for your crew members because they are so important for your film. And just keep making films, because maybe it might not be your thing. You'll find out through actually physically being there. So yeah, keep making films. That's my main advice, really.
Yes, which is what you did.
Yeah, that's what I did.
Incredibly prolific when you were in school.
Even if it's like silly films, there's a lot of like embarrassing old videos I used to make when I was a teenager, but it really helped with my skill set.
Yeah.
Like I look back and me and my old friend Laura, we'd like laugh about it. We'd be like, oh, there was a story, there was an
Laura
arc.
Grant by any chance?
Laura Grant, yeah.
Another great filmmaker in her day as well.
She's so clever.
Yeah, great student.
Yeah, but so yeah, we just look back and we find it so funny. But you could see that back then, even when you don't have the knowledge, you still had that slight story arc in those films, and you see yourself develop and, you know, get better, and yeah, just keep making films.
Yeah, I think pretty much have the same advice. You have to kind of, I feel like the most important thing about getting better at making films is trying to, you know, take every opportunity to, you know, experiment and actually film and, you know, take photographs or make videos and just develop your skills on site and not just sit in your room and just think about, you know, developing your skills. And when you're starting out, you don't have to be as caught up about having the equipment to do so. It's more about learning how to tell a story and using the basics to tell the story. So even the most like technical stuff doesn't even matter that much, in the sense that if you can tell a story using a visual medium, that's a much more like important skill than it is to use you know, a camera, a DSLR properly. Yeah, and now nowadays you can even search up, you know, tutorials online on YouTube you know, to figure out how to use you know, how to light something properly. So developing those soft skills, those like creative aspects of filmmaking is a lot more important than it is with technical skills.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, absolutely. Just keep making stuff. Don't just make things for yourself, make things for other people as well, because that's a real discipline. And share it. Yeah, make sure people are seeing it. You know, gauge people's responses, and keep, you know, show an interest in what's happening. You know, in, you know, content creation. Yeah, what are the trends? Where's the technology going? Yeah, what new equipment has come out that could make your life a lot easier or enable you to do things that you didn't do before. Yeah, and use it to give yourself a voice or to give others a voice.
I think that's so important, the idea of sharing it as well. That's why we keep doing the Film Awards. A lot of people think it's all about just the you know, the accolade of being the best editor or the best cinematographer, but really it's a celebration of filmmaking and getting the hard work that's produced by the students in our school out there and seen, because it's wonderful.
It's
and it
the
needs
students
to be seen.
that tend to win those awards are the ones that are not doing it for the award,
Yeah.
they're doing it because they have something to say.
Absolutely. Yeah. John?
Yeah, so I'd say definitely you want to make as much as you can. I would say do have a go at the technical roles. Not because you need to be brilliant at them, but because have a go at camera, have a go at sound, have a go at editing, you know, because you might realise that actually you might go in thinking, I want to be a camera person, but actually if you have a go at sound, you might actually realise you really want to do sound. And if you're not having a go, then you won't discover that. So, and playing with those different areas will make you a better filmmaker, whichever role you end up doing. Because if you know how sound works and camera works and editing works, you're going to be a better director. And same, if you know how the other areas work, you're going to be a better camera person. So getting a perspective and some experience in everything is actually really useful.
Sounds like a good pitch for the film course that we run.
I know,
By the way, well done, John. Came back round to that in the end. We got there. That's just about all we have time for today. So I'd like to start by just thanking all of my guests, John and Larissa, Alison and Nicholas. All excellent contributions. I think we must have at least 2 shows worth of content there. So amazing. And thank you very much also to my co-host, Chloe Jazzy Lau.
Thank you also to our production team that has been working so diligently behind the scenes, led by Abby Wan. This includes Anakin Wan, Mahika Kandalwal, Vivian Chung, Karina Au, Izzy Paulin, Jessica Locke, Ashika Mamgain, and Justin Mann, along with Curran Chan.
We're going to be back soon with the 2nd episode of the 3rd season with more tech-related content. Stay safe wherever you're listening or watching the show. And in the meantime, as ever, we'd love to hear your thoughts on the show. What would you like us to discuss? If you have any ideas, questions or feedback, then please write to digileaders@webmail.sis.edu.hk. And don't forget to rate or like the show wherever possible. As always, thanks for joining us and see you next time.